Hello, and welcome to the Care Machine Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Helen Mees. Access to sports activities and facilities are vital to ensuring people remain fit and healthy throughout their lives, particularly in urban communities. But can the societal benefits of exercise outweigh the environmental impact that sports equipment, clothing, and amenities provide? The total annual revenue of the global sporting goods market, including equipment, clothing, athletic footwear, and activity tracking devices, exceeded £300 billion last year, with an annual turnover of UK sporting goods manufacturers being around £1 billion annually. While the trade in sporting goods contributes significantly to the global and UK economies, the sustainability of the way in which these items are produced, transported, sold and disposed of is becoming harder to ignore. Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions are typically the largest category for major sporting goods brands, but for the most part these products can be difficult to repurpose or recycle and regularly end up in landfill, where they often sit for hundreds of years, leaching out harmful chemicals and microplastics, which become absorbed into the natural environment. The Organisation for Elite Athletics UK Sport has set out an environmental sustainability strategy with a goal for high-performance sports to reach net positive impact by 2040. The hope is that this strategy will help raise awareness of the impact of sport on the environment and encourage casual athletes and the general populace to prioritise sustainability in their sports and exercise choices. But how does this change the manufacture and disposal of these goods? That's where sports engineering comes in. In 2023, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers published a report on the role of engineering in sport, showcasing how technology is helping the sector become more sustainable and inclusive. Recommendations were made on how the UK can maintain and capitalise on its leading position in the field of sports engineering, while improving health education and long-term benefits to society. My guest today is lead author of that report, Dr. Tom Allen, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Engineering at Manchester Metropolitan University. Tom has a PhD in sports engineering and is a Fellow of the IMechE, as well as being a member of the International Sports Engineering Association. He is part of the leadership team for the UK Metamaterials Network and also Healthcare Challenge Lead, which focuses on the use of metamaterials in healthy living and healthcare, with sub-themes on exercise, well-being, ageing, monitoring and diagnostics and therapeutics. I began by asking Tom about the value of sports and exercise to population health and what impact sports equipment is having on the environment. Tom, thank you so much for joining me on the Care Machine podcast. I'm really pleased to have you here on the show. Now, over the years, you and I have had many conversations about metamaterials and sports technology, but I don't think we've ever spoken about the role sustainability plays in those two areas. So this is a little bit of a kind of new Venn diagram for us, I think, today. So just to set the scene for our viewers, we're going to discuss the importance of physical exercise and public health, and how in undertaking sport to improve our health, we are inadvertently impacting the environment through our consumption of sports products and materials that are used in their manufacture. Now, that's a real lot to take in, right? So let's start with the health and exercise part first, and we'll get into kind of a definition of that. So how does sport, exercise and physical activity contribute to individual population health?
It's really important to just remain active as part of a healthy lifestyle. In the same way that we should eat healthy, we should also be active and engage in exercise to help us maintain our health. We shouldn't just go to the doctor when we feel ill. We should maintain a healthy lifestyle to prevent that from happening. So it's the idea of this preventative health. You eat healthy, you exercise, you engage in these things, and this can help your health. And that can be your physical health as well as your mental health, and also social benefits as well.
What makes sport and physical exercise a central part of public health planning compared to, just every day kind of going to the gym or going for a jog?
I think it's those extra sort of mental and social health benefits that you get. So you can go out on your own and you can exercise on your own, which is healthy for you as an individual. But if you have these public initiatives like park run or running clubs, then that can bring people together. So you have the social and the mental health benefits as well. I could go running with my running club. It's a free group which started in COVID, and I went last night. And if I said, right, I'll go running and look out the window and it's raining, I might not go. But because at my running club, we
Yeah.
meet at a regular time, Tuesday and Thursdays, I go regardless. And actually, with work, it's quite good because I finish work and I go running. And the same with activities like park run and other social groups. So that getting together and engaging in sport and doing things together can encourage others. And we all know about the large fun runs that we have and things like this. I think that's the benefit, and it can encourage a larger population to get involved, that supportive environment.
So it's not just about the actual physical fitness part that you could maybe do in a gym. It's about the social interaction. It's about the mental health, I guess, as well.
Yeah, the
And
mental
being
health,
together in a group. Yeah.
and also being outside in nature as well. All of these things can have positive benefits. And if you're playing competitive sport, there's all sorts of different benefits of winning and losing, and competing in different competitions and things.
Yeah. Okay. So that gives us an idea of why physical activity is important. But why is it of interest to you as a sports engineer? Why do you feel that this needs to be discussed? And what prompted you to kind of think about this as needing policy writing around it?
So sports engineering is all about solving problems, in sport, using science, engineering, technology, all the topics that we enjoy. And traditionally, it was always about elite sport, trying to get people to run as fast as possible or to compete as well as possible in the Olympics and things like this. But the more modern definition is becoming broader, so it spans more into health, topics that we're talking about today, inclusivity, the environment, and encouraging that inclusivity. So sport isn't just about elites, elite what you watch on TV or what you watch in the stadium. It's for everybody. So encourage everybody to get involved. And that's what really drives me. And with the policy report, that's what the key topics were. How do we make sport as inclusive as possible? And that's a problem that engineers can solve, and it's a problem for engineers to engage with and solve. And that includes the equipment, the stadiums, everything needs to be inclusive and also sustainable and not harmful to the environment as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the policy report. So the Institution of Mechanical Engineers policy report, which is entitled Sustainable, Inclusive, Innovative, it was published in 2023. And I'll put a link to that on the screen for our viewers. Could you just share a little bit of the kind of the headline messages, if you like, in the report and explain why engineering has plays such a critical role in shaping the future of sport?
Yes, so the headline messages are aligned to the title. So we have that, inclusive. How do we make sport more inclusive? But also sustainability as well. So how do we ensure that by making sport inclusive and producing products and stadiums, we're not actually damaging the environment while we're doing that? And then the role that innovation can have in that. And that's the key bit. That's where the engineering comes in. So how can engineers apply innovations, new technologies, new processes to make sport more inclusive and also more sustainable and better for the environment? So we have these circular economy and sort of circular, environmental issues, which are really, really important. And that's the key thing. It's bringing engineers together, but also with non-engineers as well, and working in a multidisciplinary nature to tackle these important problems.
Yeah, I mean, people often don't think about, when they're sort of picking up a tennis racket or kicking a football, that engineers have been involved in that process. But actually, we're pretty tied into it, aren't we? I mean, this is what you do for a living.
Yeah, exactly. With everyday products, when you use your computer, when you use your phone, or when you go and play tennis or go running or put your bag on, you don't actually realize that all of these products are being designed by somebody. And that is the role of engineers, isn't it, to design the cars and the trains and all of these things. And sport just naturally fits within that category. And for a lot of people, there's crossover as well, maybe with their bike, which they ride to work or ride to school or whatever it is that they're doing. So it all spans across, and everything around us is designed by engineers, and that includes sport, and it includes me watching sport as well. When you're watching sport on TV, and you see the line calling systems in tennis or the goal line technologies in football, they're all designed by engineers. It's not just the physical systems or the rackets that we hold, and yeah, all sorts of different things. The training tools that the athletes are using that we don't see. There's a whole host of different areas of sports engineering all going on behind the background. But I think that's actually a good
Yeah.
thing. We don't want people to pick up their tennis racket and think about engineering. We want them to think about tennis and having fun in the same way that when you get in your car, you don't want to think, oh, I hope someone's done some safety testing on this. You just want to drive the car and not even think about it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the aspects then within the report, and particularly you talked there about it's not just the equipment that we use, but actually the whole environment of sport that we need to consider from a sustainability point of view. So, can you just kind of elaborate a little bit on the reasons why sports facilities are essential to enabling an active lifestyle?
Yeah, so sports facilities are absolutely crucial if we want to have an active lifestyle, because we need somewhere to engage in the sport, and we want to be able to do this on a regular basis, and we want to be able to do it safely as well, and that can have all sorts of different meanings in terms of safety. So, for example, if we want to play football or rugby or tennis, we need a space to go and do that. If we want to go skateboarding, we need a safe space, which is typically a skate park, and we want to make sure that someone has actually designed that skate park to be safe. So it's really crucial that if we want to engage in these activities, we need the space to do it. And that can be particularly important in urban areas within the cities as well. So we do need to make sure that we allocate space within the cities for sports facilities and football pitches and things like this. And they will often be much more heavily used than in the country, and maybe at more varied hours as well. So we need to have these facilities, and places where we have a shortage of space, we need to make sure that we can use those regularly as well.
So, what is it about the sports facilities that sort of play such an important role in terms of sustainability? Is it the way that you build them? Is it the way that they're designed so that people can move around in them? What sort of aspects is it that you're looking at when you're thinking about sustainability in these buildings?
So there's all sorts of different factors relating to sustainability. So if we're thinking about the places that people use, you've got all sorts of things from where they're located to the transport costs and all of these things which all influence lighting, etc. But if we're talking about pitches and courts and things, then we also have the materials which they're made from and the effect that they may have on the environment in terms of the construction, and sometimes they have particles and microplastics in them which can also get into the environment as well. So the design of all of it has an influence.
Well, I wanted to come on to that topic because it is something that comes up quite often, isn't it, in conversation with football pitches and other sports fields. Being some of the most popular sites that the public would use. This issue around artificial surfaces and natural playing surfaces, it's been quite a hot topic. So, what are some of the differences between uh, these different surfaces, and what are the trade-offs between having artificial and natural surfaces?
Yeah, so the debate around artificial turf and the microplastics is huge, and I'll come on to that. But I'll start by talking about the differences. So we can have a natural pitch, so a grass pitch for football, and there's obvious, clear benefits for for a natural pitch. So, for example, everyone likes to see natural grass. We have animals and other wildlife, which like that. It looks nice, particularly in the country. It's absolutely ideal. But everybody is also familiar with the idea of a muddy football pitch. Anyone that's watched football, particularly old football, they will see this. And if you watch the old matches and then you compare them to the new matches, so when I put the football on the TV, one of the first things that I notice is just how pristine the pitches are now, and that's because they are
Yeah.
hybrid pitches often. But in the olden days, they're very muddy. If you go to the country, if it's been wet, particularly in England in the winter, it'd be a muddy pitch. So that doesn't necessarily look like a problem, but could you imagine if you have in the city a muddy pitch and you want people playing on that every single hour of the day that it's open, then it becomes a problem. So you can't play as much. So the idea of an artificial pitch is we have an artificial pitch is made of synthetic materials. It's much more durable and it's designed that we can play on it much more. So we have the benefit that you can get more people playing on it more regularly. So that has the health benefits that we've talked about. But being synthetic, it obviously doesn't have the same impact on the environment because the natural
Mm.
pitch is inherently good for the environment. Other than sometimes we have to do lots of watering, but the synthetic materials we're creating a synthetic environment that can build up heat, for example, in the city. But the major problem at the moment is around the microplastics. So we have the rubber crumb which we put into the on top of the pitch that gives it the traction and sort of impact requirements that we want. But unfortunately, that all gets out and gets into the environment. Anyone that's played on those pitches will be familiar with it getting on their clothes and shoes and socks and things. And actually, what happens is that all then gets out and into the rivers and it gets everywhere. And everybody knows about the problem of plastics, in our water and in our environment. So it's a major problem, and the EU are bringing in new microplastics regulations, and the whole industry is needing to change to account for that.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of go on to that a bit because so for our viewers, there is a new European microplastics regulation that is now out, and this is going to affect how artificial surfaces are used and what innovations might sort of affect the use of that. So what is that going to do to the sports industry? What impacts is it going to have, and how will we continue to use this kind of product?
So it's actually absolutely transformative for the industry in terms of the artificial pitches because the regulation specifically says that you can't intentionally add microplastics. And what we've traditionally done with these pitches is we get a load of plastic crumbs and we sprinkle them all over the pitch. So we are intentionally adding lots of plastic. And I guess we didn't necessarily think that was a problem in the past. And then we realized that this was getting everywhere and it was bad for the environment. So we need to come up with alternatives. And there's all sorts of ways of coming up with alternatives. You can have a completely different change. You could completely redesign the pitch so it doesn't require these additional elements which are adding in. That's one approach. And another approach is to say, well, can we add something that isn't a microplastic? Can we add something which is maybe more natural to replace that plastic? And that is opened up a whole new field of research. There's lots of papers being published. So one of my roles is the editor of the Sports Engineering Journal. We have lots of papers coming through at the moment. You can go online and read them all around the effect of changing the plastic for natural alternatives such as cork or wood chippings or other things which can replace them. But what that means is it means producing them, testing them, comparing against the microplastics at the moment, testing that in the lab, testing that in the field, testing that with players, understanding the long-term implications. It's a big piece of work. It's a huge project, and Loughborough University are doing a great job and leading a lot of this. But yeah, something definitely to look out for, and it's something that we'll see changing, in the future.
That sounds fascinating because again, you're using a natural material, but you've got to be able to compare it with these plastic surfaces that you're already using, and I suppose the natural environment as well, to see whether or not you get the same sort of feels and effects. There's, as you've rightly said, there's a lot of research goes into this before you ever see any of these things out, in the world. So, what sort of timeline do you think will be happening before we see these being adopted across the sports
Yeah.
industry.
So you're completely right. It's all about benchmarking. So essentially, we say, right, we have the artificial filaments that we're adding. That's the benchmark. And then we take all of these sort of more natural alternatives, we benchmark them against them. We go through all these tests. I think it's going to be a slow, gradual change. So these natural filaments, the pitches with them do exist, and they're being trialed, and we might call that a field lab, where you would have one of these pitches and you trial it and you do your research in the field. In some ways, a bit like a clinical trial where we're trialing it with a smaller kind of example, and then it would slowly be rolled out. But then we have to think about the replacement of everything which is already in place. So we are
Yeah.
really talking about a slow, gradual change, but it's been forced by the regulations. The regulations have a grace period. But I'd say within the next few years, it will happen. I think without these regulations, it wouldn't happen. It might have happened slowly, but this has been much more accelerated.
So, I mean, that just goes to prove just how important regulation is in terms of how we as engineers react to changes, and also drive those regulations as well. You know, that the research that you're doing, for example, is feeding into an understanding of microplastics, which has eventually, kind of led to changes in regulation. So engineers play a really important part in this whole process, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So the regulations, the policy, they're all aligned. It's not just about going in the lab and doing the research. It's about then changing the regulations, writing the policy, encouraging new regulations, bringing everything together as this kind of systems approach. So the policy is really important. The policy sits right at the top and calls for new regulations, new research, for funding to do that. And that's why these policy reports are really important, to drive that change and to come together as a group rather than individual researchers with their own interests, come together as a community under the IMechE and saying this is a really important topic that we need to be focusing on together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's move on a little bit to the bit that I think more people will know a little about anyway, which is clothing and equipment. So we know that there are huge volumes of sporting goods that go into landfill every year, and things that are like, clothing, fast fashions, and things like tennis balls, are being designed to just be thrown away. So what's the consequence of that?
Consequences of that is huge. I think everybody is aware of the issue of chucking out your rubbish. We all have to put it into different recycling bins now, what that means. And everything that you chuck away essentially pretty much goes into landfill. So if you're chucking it away, all that effort of extracting those materials, making that product is being chucked back into the ground, going in huge piles and eventually getting into our ecosystems. That's into the water. We know that there's huge issues with plastics in the water and all of these different things. So it all contributes to the sustainability crisis that we're going through for the whole planet. So it isn't something that we should just continue. We definitely shouldn't be increasing our consumption and spanning across more areas of the world and really just increasing our consumption overall. We need to be changing that. Otherwise, it impacts back onto our health. And as we're talking about at the start, do the sport to improve our health. But if the environmental impact is having a negative influence on our health, then yeah, that's not good.
Well, I mean, that's something that we all know within this profession, that the impact that we're having environmentally is causing some of the health conditions that we're trying to address. So this is
Yes.
something that is very fundamental to what we do in the sort of healthcare engineering space, isn't it? But coming back to this issue of disposal, then how would you suggest that we break this throwaway attitude that we've developed and improve the sports industry as a whole?
There's a whole host of different things and different approaches. One is obviously a cultural thing, and changing the culture of fast fashion and throwing things away. I mean, everybody wants the latest things, and we can't deny that, and that's how the sports industry makes its money, and that's what it's based on in terms of the sports product industry. So we can't deny that fact and just say stop making things. That's not gonna go. But we need to think about how we can do that in a way which works for everybody. So making products more durable, so they last longer is one way. because we have all sorts of different things in the sustainability pyramid, and recycling is actually really quite low down at the bottom, and making things more durable, reusing things is right. So making products more durable, making sure we have maybe standards and regulations like we were talking about before, about the durability of products and ensuring that they are as durable and long lasting as possible. So maybe people will be willing to pay a premium for higher quality products which last longer, and then that's how the companies could sort of justify it. Repair schemes as well. So what if we were to actually repair things rather than just chucking it away? I mean, we're all guilty of it. We have a coat or something that gets a rip in it, and then we just chuck it away and buy a new one. But what if it was much easier to get that repaired? So ultimately, it's a change of culture, but we can't put all the blame onto the consumers. It's everybody has to be responsible. So the systems need to be in place to make this happen. So the companies can change their approach as well. Maybe have schemes where it's easier to take your old things back to get repaired, or to even have schemes where you're essentially renting equipment. And there are some companies that do this, where you would have your shoes and you're essentially renting the shoes. After a certain period of time, you return them. They would recycle them or reuse the materials in some way and send you a new pair. So you're a subscriber. And again, that is potentially a good business model. And the other one as well is to move away from this idea that we all need to own everything. So when we go skiing, for example, we go off to Europe or America, we will pack our skis in the bag, we put them on the plane. That has an environmental impact. But what if we go there and then we just rent skis from the shop? So that has a lower impact on the environment. And it's much easier actually to have that circular model with that rental system. So ski boots, for example, are all made of plastic. If you have all the ski boots in the shop, they're all rented for the season. At the end of the season, they can be returned to the manufacturer, who can remake them into new boots or recondition them for the following season. And there are lots of people doing research in this area showing about how you can take these materials, grind them down, make them back into products. There's a whole host of different things and approaches which we can do, but it's about that changing culture, and it will be slow, but the research is key to making it all happen.
Yeah, well, I wanted to pick up on that actually, and you've answered that question a little bit there. But the idea that engineers have this responsibility to design technology and sports equipment in a way that makes it recyclable. But do you think that the environmental footprint of sport and sports products are influencing the design choices that and the material selections that engineers are using or choosing to use now for equipment? Do you think that that's having an impact, or is it still the other way round?
No, I think it is coming through. And what I always think about with engineering, and particularly the sports equipment and the sports engineering industry, is that we always see these improvements regardless. If we look back at tennis rackets, so a lot of my research is about tennis rackets and looking at the history of tennis rackets and how they've changed from wooden to the composite materials that we have now. And when you look at those on a year-on-year basis, you see these continuous improvements. And these improvements are often incremental. Sometimes we have step changes, but we definitely see this clear improvement. We see that across all different sports equipment. And that can be influenced by a number of different things. It can be because the brands themselves that are designing the equipment are doing really innovative things. But at the same time, everything around us as engineers is changing and improving. So our knowledge is improving, our education is improving. The computer tools and the modeling software which we're using is all improving. It's becoming more efficient. It's more efficient for us to talk online like we are now and have meetings. So everything becomes more efficient, everything works better, and the engineering gradually and incrementally improves from one year to the next. So stuff will naturally improve. And in that same sense, sustainability is coming through as a more and more important topic. There's more and more knowledge around the subject. There's more tools for engineers to use. There's more experts that can come in and help them. So we are seeing this gradual shift. So the companies, sometimes they're taking huge efforts to address it, but it's happening anyway because it's part of the culture and it's part of what we're doing now, and it's easier to be done. It's more likely that when fresh graduates come in to the company, they will put their hand up in a meeting and say, well, are we thinking about sustainability when we're designing this product? So it's a change which is happening, and we should be thinking about all of these different things, designed for sustainability right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of companies, and as you said there, younger engineers coming through, it's almost part of their psyche now to think about sustainability and the environment. But some of us old folks, not necessarily as tuned in. Do you think companies are still seeing it as a cost to them to be more environmentally aware and more sustainable in the products that they design, or do you think that they are embracing it a lot more?
I think it really depends. There will obviously be some reluctancy at some stages, and it is part of that gradual change that will eventually go away. But it really comes down to business. For example, if a company has two lines of tennis racket, they have their conventional tennis racket and they have their one made of natural materials, for example, natural composites, and it doesn't sell as well, then it's less likely that they'll continue to do it. But if it sells really well, then they will continue to do it. So it does always come down to business models, but the customer base is changing. They're starting to expect it. So I think that whilst in some cases there's reluctance, there's also positive change as well, and it can be a big marketing tool for a lot of companies to drive things forward.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I wanted to come back to the IMechE report because in recommendation 3, you called for sports technology providers to adopt independent eco-labels. Now, I wanted to ask, what is an eco-label and why is it important?
So eco labels are really important in my opinion. I think they will really help us drive change. So an eco label is a label from an independent organization to show that something meets some certain sort of eco credentials. So it's not just a company saying, look, I've made this new shoe, it's great, it has no environmental impact at all. It's being done independently, which we all know the importance of that. And a really good and established scheme is the EU Ecolabel scheme. So if anyone's really interested in this, I would just go into the EU Ecolabel website and it tells you all about it, all the benefits, what it's about. But really it's about that independent verification or independent checking from someone else. So for example, you say the top 10 to 20% of products within a certain category in terms of their eco credentials will get this label. That is a mark of badge of honor for the company. They'll want to strive to do that. And that in itself can drive change from the company's perspective, which is really important, but it can also help consumers make informed choices. We've all been there. We go into the shop, you see all the different products on the shelf, whether that's tennis rackets, bikes, running shoes, and they all say, oh, this one's made out of natural. And you say, well, I don't know. If there was one in the shop, we said the EU says this is the one which is good, or if there was a sporting governing body that said this is the football which we have certified and said meets our environmental credentials, it gives that customer some choice in the same way that standards give customers more informed choices.
So again, it's a way of regulation driving change and encouraging companies to then create technologies which have this labeling, so that people can see actually, yeah, these are a better option than something else. So hopefully, companies will overcome their sort of the barriers, if you like, to taking on some of these kind of labeling processes.
Exactly. Most people are familiar with the idea of greenwashing, where essentially you say how great all these environmental credentials are whilst sort of covering up some of the others. So you exploit the really good things, but don't do that full transparent presentation. It also makes it easier as well. It's much easier if you're the person who makes footballs, and the governing body for football says, right, to be a football, it has to bounce a certain height, it has to be a certain size, has to be a certain weight, for you to design to that criteria. Don't just say, right, make a football and then we'll just pick one which we think is going to be good. They give you really clear, defined criteria, and the eco label is a similar idea. This is what we've decided, makes an environmentally friendly football. If you meet this criteria, you will get this mark. It's very clear. It's very clear for the company to design to that, and it's easier for the customer to say, okay, I can look up what this means. I can go onto the governing body website. It says what requirements are for it to get this badge, and it's all nice and transparent for for everybody. So that avoiding that greenwashing is important, but also, as you said, making it much simpler and more straightforward for the company to achieve what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah. So there's a real motivation then there, isn't there, for not just engineers, but for the sports governing bodies as well to push for these kind of labelling processes and to really sort of change people's view of when they pick up an item off, in the shop, to really think about what the life cycle of that piece of technology is going to be and whether or not they should be purchasing it. So there's a whole kind of ecosystem there, isn't there, of people who need to be involved in this to try and drive it forward.
Yes, it's very multifaceted. And actually, I've talked quite a lot about going into shops, and a lot of people don't do that anymore. A lot of people just go do their shopping online.
Yeah.
And if you have eco labels, maybe you could go on to your online shop and you can just filter. I only want to look at products that have an eco label. So it's a very simple
Yeah.
way, and the information can be communicated online. So it involves lots of different people to come together, because if you have an independent eco label, you need to be clear that eco label is right, it's achievable. Maybe it's not too ambitious, it's enough for the companies to make, and then maybe over time it essentially becomes a bit harder to make, that you have the right experts that come together to design that. So it does involve a lot of people, careful consideration, but I think it's important.
Well, let's talk about the future then, Tom, because you've touched on it there, as to what this might look like. But is the sporting industry ready to embrace this kind of thing? And what would a sort of design for sustainability process, way of thinking, ethos, what would that look like, do you think, in the future, that we go from a few companies who are doing it now to the entire industry being involved? What would you hope this would look like in the future?
So yeah, so I think the sports industry is embracing it, and it's really great that since writing the report, I have seen lots of examples, and I've seen lots of things, people sort of showcasing it and what they're doing, and I think it's about that whole change, and probably it's the avoiding throwing things away at the end. If we can sort that out, then that would be the problem that I think we really need to be thinking about. And some of the challenges there as well is when we have multiple materials. So if we have clothing which has multiple different fibers all in it, it's much harder to recycle than if it's made of one material and one set of fibers, particularly if they're all clearly reported exactly what they are and they can be used. So I think reducing the number of materials, thinking about recycling, and thinking about it right from the offset as well. So if, for example, we could have a shoe and we could design it just from one material, and maybe meta materials and other sort of structural architecture could help in that sense, then it's much easier for a company to take that back and to recycle it than if you have, lots of different materials all glued and bonded together. So you take your shoe back to the company and say, right, now we have to go through this process of separating all of these different things out. So if we have modular
Yeah.
designs which can come apart, or fewer materials, but we really need to be thinking about, if we're getting product, how are we then getting that back to the company? So we might have a shoe, for example. We say this shoe is entirely recyclable. All the materials in it can be recycled. It can be disassembled. But I bought it from this company, and their headquarters at the other side of the world, and then in a completely different location is where that shoe was actually made. So the process of getting that individual shoe back somehow in a way which doesn't have an environmental footprint which is larger than just chucking it in the bin is quite complicated. So you need to have these models of, maybe, like I said, rental systems where there's an automatic thing where the shoe comes to you with a package which you return it in, and it's all very simple system so that you can keep going around. And so, as I was saying before, actually you have more the rental destinations where, rather than everybody owning their own things, if you want to go mountain biking, you go and rent the bike, and it's going to be in good condition. And also the pricing as well, because often when you do rent things, it is more expensive than buying it yourself in the long run. So all of these things need to be considered, but I think that designing right from the start and having that full circular economy is the key, and probably reducing the number of materials and number of parts and how they're all bonded together so they can be separated.
Yeah, I think we need to very much consider the infrastructure around this, not just the product development as well. So there's a whole raft of things that the engineering community are really going to have to work on over the next few years, which is quite exciting, actually, I think. Um, Now, I know you're a very passionate snowboarder, and I know that you love your sport. What kind of technologies are we going to be seeing in the next few years that are really going to be the things we can hang this sustainability badge onto? And what sort of things should we be encouraging people to do in terms of getting into sports and exercise and improving their physical activity?
So I think we're going to see innovations in materials and manufacturing. So things like natural fiber. So loads of sports equipment is made of composite materials. And composite materials, when you have synthetic fibers and you put them in some form of resin, it makes that resin much stiffer. And that's huge advantages for snowboards, as we were just talking about. But that isn't great for the environment. So what if we were to replace those fibers with natural fibers, which we can grow and separate and use in that sense? That has challenges because those synthetic fibers are typically really highly engineered, have really high properties. And then when we have the natural fibers come in, they're often not as good, and sometimes not even close to being as good in terms of strength and stiffness. But with careful design, we might be able to get around that. So, for example, if we were to make things thicker to increase stiffness and design in certain ways, use structural design approaches to do that. So I think we need to be thinking, okay, it's not just about having the most superior material, the best performing material from a purely mechanical perspective. Can we use a more sustainable material which maybe isn't quite as good functionally, but if we design in a certain way, we can compensate for that. And I think that design, advanced materials will all help in that as well. Another really exciting area which is coming through as well is sort of smart sports equipment, so sports equipment which might have sensors in it, e-textiles, and all these types of things where we can connect. We could even have metamaterial structures which adapt and change their geometry in real time based on information getting from sensors to make the sport more inclusive, more enjoyable, safer. But all of that can have an influence on the environment as well. As soon as we start embedding electronics in textiles, we already talked about how if you have different materials. Imagine if you start putting electronic wires and things in there. So how can
Yeah.
we do these things in a way which is also recyclable? Because we don't want to go backwards. We want to continue going forward and making sport as exciting and fun as possible, and bringing in these new innovations, but doing it in a way which is also sustainable. Again, that's why these policy reports are really important, so we can have these conversations. We're not trying to stifle or stop any innovation. We want it to bring forward, and we need to make things as inclusive as possible. And all of these smart sports equipment, well-designed sports equipment, inclusive design, sustainable design, can all contribute to these things.
Tom, you paint a really exciting picture of the future of sport, and obviously from an engineer's point of view, really exciting in the opportunities that lay ahead, I think, for people in the profession. So I'm very excited to see not just what comes out of the work that you've done in terms of policy, but also the wonderful research that you're doing. But I think there's some great opportunities for the future of sport to really see how that's going to change with all this wonderful innovation. And hopefully, we will make the world a more sustainable place by doing that and improving people's health. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It is always a pleasure to talk to you. You always have some fascinating things to share with us. So thanks very much, Tom.
Thank you.